Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to the current state of crowdfunding talk. I'm very excited to chat with you all today. Thank you so much to the amazing folks at DStars for inviting me. I think we tried to do this a couple years ago, but unfortunately, my schedule didn't allow for it, so I'm very, very excited to be here. So, who am I? Hi, my name is Anya Combs. I have been in the games industry almost 2 decades at this point. I got my start in the Flash gaming space back in 2008, working for a little Flash gaming website called addictinggames.com. I did developer relations, I did licensing, I did some social media. Really, my job was to find games for the site, and I built a lot of really great relationships with creators who I still talk to this day, which is pretty exciting. We were owned by Viacom, so I was moved from Addicting Games to Nickelodeon, where I did some content development for video games and mobile games here in New York City. I got a little disillusioned with the whole corporate sort of structure. So I left Nickelodeon and went to a company called Kickstarter. I'd say I'm probably most known as the Kickstarter person. I was at Kickstarter just over 6 years. I was the director of games there before I left. So I was responsible for video games, tabletop games, VR, mobile, LARPs, anything involving games, gaming accessories, dice, cards, things like that. It was a cool job. I loved it. It was a lot of fun. It was a absolutely wild time in my life. But I decided it was time to move on in March of 2022. I joined a company called BackerKit. I was there for just over a year and a half, focusing on sales for tabletop. I still did, a little bit of work with the video games folks, which was great. I loved video games. And I left that job in November of 2023, and I have been a freelance consultant ever since. Obviously, still very much working in the world of crowdfunding, helping out multiple crowdfunding campaigns, doing strategy and crowdfunding. I also do some games business strategy, some business development. I do some community management, really just anything that involves games from like a soft skills side of things, just to help creators be as successful as they possibly can. So it's a fun little thing. And then when I'm not doing game stuff, I'm also a professional musician here in New York City. I play the saxophone. I tour pretty routinely with a band. We're going on tour again in May and June, which is really cool. So I have a bit of a nomadic, crazy artistic life, which I love. So, I wanted to just sort of first talk about how crowdfunding actually works. I think sometimes we kind of forget that, it's a little bit more than just a 30-day crowdfunding period. That's sort of like the meat and potatoes of it, but there's a lot that happens before and a lot that happens after. So, the first thing is the concept period. I really consider this sort of like your ideation period, right? Oh, I have an idea for a game, tabletop game, video game. I know this is more of a video games audience, but I'm still going to speak about tabletop because in crowdfunding, obviously, that's a pretty big part of the crowdfunding world. But we come up with an idea for a game, and then we get into the development period, right? So we're not just concepting, we're actually developing, right? Making prototypes, we're making builds, and then we get to a place where we're like, wow, our funding maybe isn't exactly where it needs to be, or we need to reach more people in order to be successful. So then we get into the pre-funding period, right? So this is everything that happens after you've decided you're going to launch a crowdfunding campaign and before you actually launch your crowdfunding campaign. So that's building your page, that's building your community, that's getting everything ready to get to you pushing that button to say, yes, I'm going to go live for my crowdfunding campaign. So then we get into the funding period. Ideally, it's 30 to 35 days. Anything less than that, unless there's a specific reason, like you're doing a sprint of some kind for like a event or something. Anything less than 30 to 35 days, just like quite frankly, isn't enough time. And anything over 30 to 35 days within a funding period is just a little bit too much. People get bored. I try to look at the 30 to 35 day period as you want to hit 2 payment cycles. Anything over that second payment cycle, people are going to have more bills. They're less likely to back a crowdfunding campaign. And then you get into the post funding period, right? So that's your pledge management phase. That's your fulfillment phase. That's when you're like, great, now I actually have to like make the thing and ship the thing. So that's roughly like a 5-point period plan when it comes to crowdfunding as to what it actually is. How did crowdfunding start? How did we decide that we're going to ask strangers for money on the internet to fund our cool ideas and make our game dreams happen, right? Well, in 1997, a British band, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, so please forgive me, Marilyn. They funded their reunion tour with online donations from their fans. I kind of disclosed that I am a touring musician, and I can tell you touring even now in 2025 is extremely expensive and it's extremely difficult. So this band decided they wanted to have a reunion and they wanted to go on tour. And so rather than looking to things like label support, they probably didn't have any label support at that time. They decided to go directly to their fans and say, if you give us money, we will come to your city, we will tour in your city, we will play a show in your city. And it was really successful. So that's really sort of the first documented exchange of crowdfunding. In 2021, a website called Artist Share that really focused on music and building that relationship between fans and musicians, they created the first dedicated crowdfunding platform. Specifically, what that means is a place online for people to pledge money in order to receive a reward based on the promises of that creator, right? So this is the first sort of like dedicated crowdfunding platform. I believe Artist Share still exists, but I don't believe they're active. Like, I believe the website still exists, but I don't think that they've done much over the last, decade or so. But this is kind of the first like documented case of a crowdfunding website. In 2007, Indiegogo launches, right? So not just music, but design and technology, product, just different ideas sort of coming to life through creative people deciding that it's time to bring this to the internet, right? This is sort of one of the big ages of the internet is 2007. People excited to be on the internet making stuff and being involved in stuff, which is pretty cool. In 2008, the Great Recession happened. A lot of people were out of work. A lot of people were in sort of a complicated space financially. And a lot of artists were not necessarily getting the funding that they needed and wanted to make their thing. So people really started looking to each other to start funding all of their creative ideas. And this kind of gave birth to Kickstarter, which launched in 2009. Really, the foundation of Kickstarter is from Perry Chan, who is the creator of Kickstarter. He got the idea when he was in college. I believe this was at Tulane in New Orleans. If it wasn't Tulane, I'm still pretty sure it was in New Orleans. He decided he wanted to bring a band to his campus, and the booking committee didn't want to. So he went to his fellow students and got people to raise money in order to bring a band to campus. And he was like, wow, this is a thing. So after sort of seeing the success of Indiegogo and sort of seeing the recession happen in 2008, he launched Kickstarter with 2 other people. He launched it in the Lower East Side. They had a pretty fantastic office from what I understand. I do remember eventually that office moved to Brooklyn when I joined Kickstarter. And the door to the first original Kickstarter office was still in the Kickstarter office. It's where people would store their bikes, in the Brooklyn office. So a lot of history that existed before they sold the building, and I think they sold it 2 months ago. In 2012, President Obama signs the Jobs Act. This is also known as the crowdfunding bill, and this legalizes equity crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding is different from something called flexible crowdfunding, which is also different from something called full crowdfunding. And we'll kind of go into what those other 2 are a little bit later. But equity crowdfunding is basically saying, at a very, very simple level, I will back you at a specific reward tier. Maybe I'll get a game, cool. But really, this is the promise of receiving a monetary reward once you are successful. So I might get royalties, I might get a kickback, right? It's basically a way to do like monetization crowdfunding. 2012 is also when BackerKit launches. BackerKit actually started as a Kickstarter project initially, and when they were going through their process of having a pretty successful Kickstarter, they realized that there wasn't really a dedicated space for creators to catalog all of the backers that they received, right? So there wasn't something called a pledge manager. So BackerKit launches their pledge manager site in 2012 that helps capture different backers for creators in order for creators to fulfill their projects in a little bit more streamlined of a manner. Eventually, they also launched an ad service. So they run ads before projects launch to sort of build a community for creators, and they also run ads during the life cycle of a campaign in order to capture people as the project is live. In 2013, Patreon launches, right? We're not going to speak too much about Patreon other than this slide, only because subscription based services aren't necessarily in the same realm as crowdfunding. But I think it's important to call out Patreon here because they created basically subscription based crowdfunding to a certain degree, right? Like there's a very handheld relationship between the two. And they were able to develop, kind of carve out their own space in the market for Patreon to kind of be very successful in smaller donation based subscription services. So for $5 every month, you might get like a fans only episode of a podcast. I know that's a very, very successful space for them, which is like awesome to see. I love seeing different variations of crowdfunding and how people can kind of like carve their own ways and make their own paths. In 2015, it's very interesting to me that these two websites launched at the same time because Fig was a video games only crowdfunding platform, and GameFound is a pretty successful tabletop only tabletop games crowdfunding platform. So Fig launched not just a video game specific crowdfunding platform, but also the first equity based video games crowdfunding platform. Kickstarter does not offer equity, they do full funding. Again, we'll get into this a little bit later. But Fig was really sort of the first space to offer equity crowdfunding, and they were very successful in it. GameFound, again, tabletop only. We'll get actually a little bit more into GameFound and what they offer because I'm going to do a bit of a breakdown a little bit further. But important to note, they both launched in 2015. In 2021, Kickstarter announces a move to blockchain. They have since decided not to move forward with their blockchain announcement. I don't know if that's ever going to change, but they sort of inadvertently created a big push in the market for more competition, because in 2022, BackerKit, the pledge management slash ad service, launches their own crowdfunding platform. They aren't doing anything category specific, so Fig, did video games. GameFound is tabletop specific. BackerKit launched a platform really to compete with Kickstarter. So they launched with virtually every single same category that Kickstarter had. So film, design and technology, publishing, games, obviously, accessories, things like plushies, pins, things along those lines. So with their 2021 move from Kickstarter, 2022, BackerKit really, really paved the way for them to possibly be a real competitor in the market to Kickstarter. In 2023, Fig unfortunately closes the doors after a sale to a company called Republic. I don't believe that Fig has done really anything on Republic. I think that they have officially completely closed their doors entirely. So the world of equity crowdfunding for video games doesn't really exist any longer. I'll be totally honest, just as like a little bit of an anecdote and a little bit of an aside. I don't know if equity crowdfunding in its current state for video games makes a lot of sense or really works. That's not to say that it will never work, and that's not to say that there's not an opportunity for it to work. But I think that games consumers are really conditioned to say, cool, $20, I get the game, because the majority of the games that fund on these crowdfunding platforms are indie games. And I think equity crowdfunding makes a lot more sense, and equity funding in general makes a lot more sense when you have much larger budgets and much larger games. I don't really know what the future holds for video games. So there could very, much be a world where equity funding and equity crowdfunding has a big resurgence in the next couple of years. Who knows? But I think that Fig was a little bit before its time, but I think it's important to sort of like give its accolades. It's like it really, really changed the market, which I think is fantastic. So with all of these platforms that we're talking about, sorry, my cable, what platforms currently exist? Well, we talked about them a little bit, and we'll go through sort of the ins and outs of them. I just want to make a quick note here that for the purposes of this presentation, we're really going to be talking about 4 than 3 than 2 platforms. There are other platforms that exist out there. There's Crowdfunder, there's Seed and Spark, which is a film specific crowdfunding platform. There's also regional platforms. There's a pretty big crowdfunding platform in France. I think there's one in Japan. There's a couple sort of all over the place. So there's like very regional specific crowdfunding platforms. There's also personal crowdfunding platforms, right? So people just run their crowdfunding project on their own site. I've seen this happen more and more. But again, just for the purposes of this talk, because we're going to talk about sort of the big 4, then the big 3, then the big 2, just to kind of tailor this to a video games perspective. That's really what we're going to focus on. So again, first, Indiegogo. Indiegogo's been around since 2007. They've made some pretty great iterative ideas. Their sort of bread and butter is design and technology. They're a rewards-based crowdfunding platform, so they don't offer equity. They offer something called flexible crowdfunding and full crowdfunding. So flexible crowdfunding is, let's say that you have a goal of $50,000, but you only make $30,000. You still receive that $30,000, even if you don't reach that initial goal. Full crowdfunding, pretty straightforward. If you ask for $50,000 and you reach $50,000, great, and anything that you receive over that $50,000 you also receive. I want to make a quick note about flexible crowdfunding and why I think it has a space, but maybe not in games. Flexible crowdfunding is a little bit scary to me because if you are asking for $50,000 but you only make $30,000 and you still have promised a full game or any other rewards that are attached to whatever that is, the challenge is if you only make $30,000, you have to find a way to make that additional $20,000+ in order to come out with the project that you've promised for people. So it's a little bit of a gamble. It's a little bit scary. Obviously, if you have a surplus of money elsewhere and you're just sort of using this as a way to like build a community or get some marketing efforts, sure, I get that. But if you're like most indies and you're sort of looking, every dollar is stretched to the full limit, flexible crowdfunding may not actually be the right thing for you. Indiegogo also offers something called In Demand to any creator. In Demand is a little bit like a late pledge, sort of a way to offer rewards once the project has been completed to sort of generate some additional income. And what I mean by any creator is you can use In Demand even if you've launched something on a different platform. So if you launch something on Kickstarter, you could come to Indiegogo and still offer that in their In Demand program, which is like kind of cool. It's kind of a nice way for creators to like, again, generate a little bit more income and sort of like up their numbers a little bit. And again, I said this before, but just to reiterate it, Indiegogo is very popular with design and technology. Second, we're going to talk about is BackerKit. BackerKit is a rewards-based crowdfunding platform. They offer full funding, so no flexible, no equity. You have to reach the full amount in order to receive the full amount. Pretty straightforward. They not only offer crowdfunding, they also offer pledge management and marketing. That makes sense, right? They started as a pledge manager and then they transitioned into pledge management and marketing, and now they're doing pledge management, marketing, and crowdfunding. So really what that means is before your project launches, you would possibly have the option to run ads to drive people to like a pre-launch page. BackerKit would take care of those ads. Then you launch your project, you crowdfund, and they would also run ads, live ads, while the project is launching to drive people to the live project. And then once the project is done, you would go into the pledge management period. So that's being able to fulfill your project, but that's also possibly getting some late pledges. So for example, I want to still offer my game, but maybe I also want to offer like a pin that I wasn't able to offer during the campaign. But in the pledge manager, I can offer that. It's kind of cool. So they offer basically like a full 360 service. I would note that right now, currently, because BackerKit has launched their crowdfunding platform in 2022, they just don't have the data currently. They just don't have the numbers to really kind of, compete with the 15 years that Kickstarter has on them. But they are making some waves in the tabletop and accessories market. Specifically with tabletop, they have a pretty big catalog of RPGs. So tabletop RPGs are pretty popular on BackerKit. Then we have GameFound. I think it's important to just sort of note GameFound because while I know this is a video games heavy audience, I know the sort of relationship between video games and tabletop games are like sisters. They're closer to sisters than they are cousins, sort of thing. So I thought it would be worth sort of mentioning for anybody that is maybe looking to also crowdfund a tabletop game, or if you were just curious, like, why is tabletop such a dominant force in this space? GameFound is a rewards-based crowdfunding platform. They offer full funding, no flexible, no equity. So again, you ask for 50,000, you reach at 50,000, great. They offer crowdfunding and pledge management. They started offering pledge management, I think, before they offered crowdfunding, but that again sort of goes hand in hand. So they offer both, right? So you crowdfund on their platform, and then you can use their pledge manager on their platform. It's a lot easier than having to open accounts and owe, other companies money. They are exclusive to tabletop games, so they do not offer video games to crowdfund on their site. I don't believe they ever will. I think they are very pretty hard on just offering tabletop games. Now, tabletop games, to be clear, is not just things like TTRPGs or board games. That includes dice, that includes tables, anything that is involved in the tabletop games experience. I would also note that they are very popular in Europe. Makes sense. They're based in Poland. Europe is definitely the most driving market for them. That also includes the sort of like Euro-style board games. So like really big board games, things like a Frosthaven, a Gloomhaven, Arkham City, things like that. Those are massive on that platform. So things like small card games or like a single one-shot RPG, TTRPG, not as popular. Really just they kind of have a market on very big, intense, robust board games. And then lastly, Kickstarter. Kickstarter is a rewards-based crowdfunding platform. They offer full funding, no flexible, no equity crowdfunding. Kickstarter is still the dominant force in crowdfunding, despite GameFound making a serious dent in the space, and BackerKit, bless their hearts, trying their hardest to make a dent in the space. Kickstarter is still the dominant force in crowdfunding. They now offer, as of I think a month ago, crowdfunding, pledge management, and marketing. So they're doing their best to compete with BackerKit. I think it's a good idea. So they, again, similar to BackerKit, they offer they offer pre-launch ads before the project actually launches. Then they offer obviously the crowdfunding, and then they also offer live ads when the crowdfunding project is live, and then they offer pledge management once the project ends. They've also rolled out a bunch of new features recently, so you can do a late pledge straight on their platform. The pledge manager is still pretty new. They offer things like secret pledges. There's a lot of different features that have just sort of popped up over the last 2 years on Kickstarter. So what's changed, right? Like what's really changed kind of within this space? Well, the first thing is that Fig Republic shut down, right? So unfortunately that means that video games crowdfunding, there really isn't like a home for video games crowdfunding, just in the sense of there were two options and now there's one. But I don't know if just having one option necessarily means that's the home for video games crowdfunding. It just means it's the only option that is like actually viable, right? So video games is sort of in this a little bit of a limbo period where, Kickstarter is the dominant force within this space, but there isn't anybody that's come in that's tried to sort of capture that loss in the market like Fig was. Tabletop games is also a big factor into things that are happening right now, right? So tabletop games are dominant in this space because that relationship between the two spaces makes a lot of sense, right? I have a card game. I can actually price out how much my cards are going to cost and how much of a product I need to make, how many units I need to like actually sell. I can go to Kickstarter where I know the success rate is over 70%. I can do all of the necessary work ahead of time, fund, come out with my game. Great. Pretty straightforward, right? Video games are different. Video games have a lot more nuance to them. Video games take a lot longer to make, right? It's not uncommon for a project to fund on Kickstarter and then the video game comes out like 5 years later, right? Not an uncommon thing that happens on the site. So that relationship again between the sort of the platform and tabletop games, just it's kind of a perfect marriage in a lot of different ways. Unlike video games, where it's not impossible by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a little bit more nuance, a little bit more work that kind of needs to go into the process. So I want to just sort of like hone in a little bit more on really Kickstarter and BackerKit. I put GameFound in there again just because I said we're going to go from 4-3-2. But GameFound, again, just to kind of drive home that like GameFound is still a player in this space. Again, only focusing on tabletop, but still a very, very big player within this space. So I want to just kind of focus on the numbers of the crowdfunding platforms, and I want to start with BackerKit. I had to do this research because BackerKit hasn't disclosed any of their numbers. This was a kind of an intense process to go through, but since 2022, 13 total video games have launched on the platform, totaling a little bit less than $500,000. 10 of those 13 projects have been successful, which is, I think that's actually closer to like an 83% success rate. So I apologize for that number being incorrect, which, like, quite honestly, that's not bad. That's pretty good, right? One project has raised over $200,000, which is awesome. But I would say most projects fall within the like $30,000 to $10,000 range. So it's a little bit smaller. I think there's a couple things that are happening here, right? One is BackerKit still doesn't have the audience that Kickstarter has, right? Kickstarter has 15 years worth of an audience that they have. There's millions upon millions of users on the platform. BackerKit is also putting a lot of their resources into the tabletop space. Excuse me. So they're aggressively at Gen Con. They're aggressively at Gamma. They're aggressively at, Essence Spiel and PAX Unplugged and things like that. They aren't really kind of focusing on the video games market as much as maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. It's kind of up to them. I would also just kind of point out that these numbers, I'm not surprised to see these numbers by any stretch of the imagination on BackerKit, because I think this is pretty similar to what Kickstarter would have if they just suddenly decided to start launching video games on the platform, if they didn't have that to begin with. Video games are difficult. Video games also really every project, but especially video games, really require bringing in that community in order for you to fund. And quite honestly, like I said originally, BackerKit just doesn't have that community yet. It's not to say that they won't get there. It's not to say that it's impossible. But they, Kickstarter has a 15-year head start on them. It makes sense that they're sort of in the process of building that, and that just takes a lot of time. I wanted to focus on Kickstarter, obviously, because of the driving force here. I took this from Polygon. This is a really interesting graph to me because it is the first time, I believe, in the history of the company that video games has seen more growth than tabletop has, which is like pretty astounding, right? So as of 2024, $26.1 million has been raised just in video games, which is like an absolutely huge number. This is also the first time in the whatever 6 or 7 years that Kickstarter has seen such a massive growth in video games, which is really, really exciting. I think that's great. I think that bodes well for 2025. Of that $26.1 million, about 6 of those projects were over $1 million campaigns, specifically in the video games category. There's also a blog post. This is the credit. You're welcome to kind of read that on your own time. 441 successful video game campaigns. It's a 9% increase since 2023. It's the highest number of successful video games in the 15-year history of Kickstarter, which is awesome. It's fantastic. It's also a 28% increase from 2023, which is like pretty big. So, I think there's like a handful of reasons as to why that is. One, I think part of that is the shutdown of FIG. I think the biggest too is I think that there has been a small trickle of projects coming to Kickstarter since the video games industry has seen such a huge record number of layoffs. I want to be very clear when I say this, though, that I don't think that Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general is the band-aid that's going to like fix the current state of video games in terms of like the sort of funding desert that's happening. That's definitely not the case. But I do think that crowdfunding has a pretty legitimate chance to help people who are in a place where crowdfunding works for them, who maybe have not considered crowdfunding in the past, right? It is a viable option, but you definitely have to do the work before you kind of come to the platform, right? I also want to note here that the majority of the projects on Kickstarter in this 2024 funding period, the majority of those projects fell between the 50 to 10K range, right? So that's really like, cool. I need the last part of my development. I need a little bit of marketing dollars. I need just something to kind of like make sure I like finish this project. 5 projects have also raised 500K in 2024. Again, 6 projects raised over 6 million, or 6 projects raised over $1 million, and 57 of those projects raised 449K to about 100K, right? So these aren't crazy numbers. If we also look at these numbers based on BackerKit, right? Like BackerKit does have a chance to kind of like catch up here. It'll definitely take some time, and they're gonna have to put a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of people behind that. But we're seeing very, very similar sort of trajectories between BackerKit and Kickstarter in terms of like tabletop versus video games. I'm not surprised to see this, right? So, what has changed since 2023, 2024? What are we sort of looking at when it comes to 2025? What is this year going to look like? What is next year going to look like? Look, we're not psychics. We can't necessarily see into the future. If I could look into my like crowdfunding crystal ball and sort of say like, great, this is what's going to happen. I was confident. I'd be like, this is where things are going. I don't really know how to do that. 2025 is so far, it's been 3 months of just absolute uncertainty and chaos. We don't know what's going to happen. We can kind of look at some trends, and we can kind of like, make some estimations and opinions, and we could do that. And I'm happy to sort of like talk about what has happened and how this might change into the next year. But I would sort of first point out that competition is the biggest thing right now, right? Competition not only from the sense of, Kickstarter had their 2021 blockchain announcement, and there was a little bit of a floodgate opened of different competitors within the market, but competition also just for time. How you find a community is very different these days, right? So just the competition of getting people to come to your project outside of Kickstarter, right? Steam, console, whatever it is. The competition is fierce, and it's different, and it's more intense than ever, right? You have more companies popping up every single day. You have more options popping up every day. You also just have the option to go completely independent on how you want to do these things, right? So if somebody just wanted to raise money on their own website, they have the option to do that. That is absolutely a competitor to Kickstarter, right? Kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but video games are evolving. The industry is evolving. I am not at GDC this year, which I'm heartbroken about. But I've heard reports that the show floor has like no AI on the show floor, and it's all monetization, right? So with these sort of ever-changing business models and the way that funding happens, right? That's going to have a direct impact on crowdfunding. I think that crowdfunding is going to have a little bit more of a space and a little bit more of a market over the next couple of years. I think that the funding desert that we're all hearing about in the video game space, I think crowdfunding will take up a portion of that. It's not going to be dominant. It's not going to take up everything. But there is a real opportunity for crowdfunding to kind of help offset a handful of creators, that more than a handful of creators, but a specific portion of that funding desert that people are finding themselves in. And lastly, additional help. There more than ever, more people want to help. There's more ad services, there's more pledge managers, there's more consultants like me. It's a little bit of a fun thing that happens, but when a lot of people leave Kickstarter, they go off to consult on their own. Part of that is because I can definitely say that when I was at Kickstarter, I didn't have the time to devote to every single person that I was working with. I wanted to give that special time, but I had so many creators and so much other work. And, I was also helping run events, and I was, internally like speaking to Kickstarter, then having to speak for creators. It wasn't possible to work on the amount of projects that I wanted to. So I could just send a couple emails and say, good luck, have fun. So consultants like me, there's a handful of us that are former Kickstarter employees that are so happy to work with people and give them the time and the energy and the devotion. So there's more help than ever to have people be successful. And I'm not even just talking about the crowdfunding space, right? Like, how do we then get you into a pitch meeting with a publisher? How do we start those conversations? How do we make sure that you're maximizing your time at an event? How do we make sure that we're maximizing your time at Gamescom? How do we make sure you're maximizing your time at GDC? What does that look like? Who do you talk to, right? There's so much more help than ever for everybody to be successful. So kind of talked about like, here's a little bit of the current state of crowdfunding. Well, what are the keys to success to actually be successful in crowdfunding, right? So the first, and I'm using Kickstarter here as an example because again they are sort of the dominant force in the world of video games. Kickstarter exclusives and custom content. Sea of Stars did a very smart thing where they put everybody's name. I believe it was everyone who was a backer in the game, and they had everybody's name sort of like scattered throughout the game, and you had to kind of like find them in certain spaces. So that's exclusive, right? That's exclusive to you as a backer. You're not going to just get that. You're not just going to find your name in a game if you were to just buy a game on Steam, for example, right? So being able to offer those exclusive things like being listed as an executive producer on a game at a specific high reward tier, custom content. Let's say that the game is about a dog. Well, I'm going to draw your dog in the game, right? I'm going to put your likeness in the game to some capacity. I'm going to help. I want you to help me create a level. I want you to help me create a character, right? So things that are exclusive to Kickstarter that you can't get anywhere else, and custom pieces of content that are specific to the backer in order for the backer to be like, yeah, this is cool. This is mine that's in the game. Gameplay footage and GIFs and videos. I can't stress this enough. You cannot consider coming to a crowdfunding platform if you do not have 30 seconds of gameplay that's going to be as close to the final game as possible. Having that gameplay footage is make or break for your campaign, hard stop. And being able to splice that up into GIFs and videos, your main video, and just videos throughout the page is imperative. And then the last thing, which is really the key to success on any crowdfunding platform, is community. Building that community early, building it often, and then building it during the campaign and building it after the campaign, right? Roughly for first-time creators, there's about a 70-30 split. So about 30% of your pledges that come in are going to be from Kickstarter, right? And so that's like any features Kickstarter gives you. That's just organic search on Kickstarter, organic sort of discovery, things like that. So that means about 70% of your pledges need to come in through the community that you build, right? Social media is not that reliable. Blue Sky seems to be getting some traction, which is great. That's fantastic. Again, it makes sense. It doesn't have the numbers that like Twitter did in, 2015, 2016. Facebook is, for the most part, useless unless you're running ads on Facebook, but it's a pretty much useless platform for discovery. Discord is extremely important. That gives you that direct access to your community. You can host events there. You can host watch parties. Just ways to sort of engage in the community. And mailing lists. Mailing lists are huge, right? Being able to have that direct call to action and that direct access is amazing. TikTok, I think, is pretty hit or miss. It can be extremely successful. You just definitely need to have somebody who's like totally understands how TikTok works and how to sort of game the algorithm a little bit. But outside of that, just general organic community building, right? Hosting a playtest at your local game store, going to an IGDA meetup, finding other people that are in your local community that will back you on day one, things like that. Community is really the heart and soul of Kickstarter. Thank you all so much. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This is my name, Anya Combs. I am at Anya Combs Her Hair on all platforms except for Twitter. I don't post on there anymore, so you can find me everywhere else. And then this is my email, anya.combs@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out. I would love to help you. I'd love to see what I can do to work with you and see how we can be successful together. So don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you again to the folks at DStars for having me. Have a good day.